Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I'm your host Deepak from India. Today we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Manoj Thomas as our distinguished guest on the podcast. Dr. Manoj Thomas is the Sabanci Professor of Management and Marketing and Associate Dean of NYC Initiatives at Cornell SC Johnson College of Business. Professor Thomas oversees the Johnson Cornell Tech MBA and Cornell Executive MBA programs and spearheads new initiatives in New York City. A behavioral scientist and leading expert in pricing, he studies how psychology, framing, numerical cognition, and payment formats shape perceived economic value. His recent work also examines how moral intuitions, ideology, and political identity influence consumer decisions and market dynamics, spanning behavioral pricing, moral foundations theory, and fair market ideology. An award-winning educator like Apple Award, Stephen Russell Family Teaching Award, he is the incoming co-editor of the Journal of Marketing Research. In today's episode, Professor Manoj Thomas discusses how behavioral science influences business strategy and why neglecting behavioral science can result in strategic mistakes that can derail a company. He will also discuss Cornell's executive MBA programs, particularly Cornell Online eMBA program that is open to executives all around the world, including India. It's a pleasure to have him with us. Please join me in welcoming Professor Manoj Thomas. Professor Thomas, thank you for joining in. It's truly an honor to have you on Businesstalk today.
Thank you, Deepak. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Professor, you have published several papers on pricing, and you are known as a leading global expert on behavioral pricing. In fact, in one of your first papers published over 20 years ago, you studied the practice of Bata pricing, setting a price of rupees 499 instead of rupees 500. Why do retailers use such Bata pricing, and what is the psychology behind it?
Thank you for that question, Deepak. So, for those of you who don't know, Bata pricing, Bata is a brand of footwear that originated in the UK and was sold all over the globe. And in India, they were always sold for 495 instead of rupees 500, or 295 instead of rupees 300. And when I relocated to the US, several decades ago now, I saw that pricing practice is quite universal and global. So if you go to McDonald's in the US, you will find that the burgers are sold at $2.99, not at $3. And if you go to Walmart or if you go to other retail stores at Target, you'll see that the prices are never fine round numbers. They always end, a few pennies below the dollar digit. So I was intrigued as a PhD student here, trying to think about why that happens. And I started talking to people. And I distinctly remember talking to one of my wife's cousins here. I was asking them, why do you think retailers use this 99 a day price? And their response was, I don't know why they do. It doesn't matter to us because we never are affected by that. So if somebody says the price of a burger is 2.99, then we think it is $3. And so it seemed to me that I have an intriguing problem here where consumers don't think they're affected by this pricing strategy. But if that is true, then the companies would not be using this pricing strategy. So if McDonald's is selling millions of units, and if it sets the price of 2.99 instead of $3, it's losing 1 cent on millions and maybe tens of millions of units. And that's a lot of money. And McDonald's would not be losing that kind of money unless there is a spike in demand. So as I was pondering over this problem, that was the time when I started learning more about judgment and decision making, about Kahneman and Tversky's work, about specifically about the principle of anchoring. And I realized that this is a very good illustration of anchoring taking place in the marketplace. So the idea of anchoring was that when people process information, they kind of tend to anchor their judgment on the first piece they encounter. And I realized that's exactly what is happening here. So if I ask you to compare, let's say, two products, if you go to McDonald's and you're comparing a burger for $5 and another burger for $3, and you're saying, okay, should I spend $2 extra on this other burger? You're trying to compute the difference between 5 and 3 and say the difference is $2 and say, okay, and then you make a decision whether or not to spend the money on the more expensive burger. But if that instead of 3, if the price of the second burger is 2.99, then you're comparing 5 and 2.99. And the first instinctive response is that 5 minus 2 is $3. And is 5 minus 2.99 feels bigger than 5 minus $3. And so I think I realized this is a very interesting case of anchoring. When people are comparing prices, the judgment of the difference between two prices is always anchored on the leftmost digit. And I coined this term left digit effect. And it provided a good illustration of how the marketplace has adopted some behavioral science insights without formally realizing it. And it has become a global practice of influencing consumer behavior using those insights.
Professor, you published another paper on how price precision influences negotiations. Your studies show that when sellers use precise prices, it reduces negotiations. Why does that happen?
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. I'm glad that you're asking questions about my publications. Whenever I talk about how different patterns of numbers or digits influence consumer behavior, one of the pushback that I get, and I get mostly from economists or people who are trained uh, in economics, is that, well, it's okay when people are buying McDonald's or yogurt or tuna or small ticket grocery items. It's okay. They might be influenced by all these digit patterns. But when they're buying a car or when they're buying a house, they wouldn't be influenced by what ending digit the price has, or what patterns of digit the price has. So to kind of respond to that critique, I partnered with two of my economist colleagues here, Rinda Kadiali and Daniel Simon, and they had access to a very nice data set which looked at real estate transactions in New York State and in Florida. And so what we did is we looked at whether the difference between the list price, the price at which the seller listed the house, and the final transaction price, that is the final price that both the seller and the buyer agreed on, whether the difference between the list price and the final transaction price depends on the number of zeros in the list price. So for example, if a house is listed for 500,000, what is the final transaction price and what percentage of negotiation happened for the transaction price to come down? But if the same house is listed for 501,250, how much would the negotiation take place and how much would the price come down? And we realized that it does. So in the models that we run, it's not just the price, the list price magnitude that influences the final negotiation, but after controlling for the final price magnitude, if you look at the number of zeros, the more the number of zeros, greater is the negotiation. And what we learned is this is another example of a heuristic at work, that when people assess how high or low is this price, should I negotiate on this price, they not only consider things like what is the magnitude of the price, but they also look at patterns of digits. And when they see more precise digits, they tend to infer that the price is less negotiable.
Professor, in one of your latest papers, you explain why some consumers are more likely to negotiate than others. Could you please explain why? Which type of consumer is more likely to negotiate prices and why?
Sure, sure. Do you negotiate prices when you go to the store, Deepak?
Yes, I negotiate a lot.
Okay. So this was a paper that was led by Archer Pan, who's now a faculty at Wayne State, but he was a PhD student at Cornell. And I've had the pleasure of working with him when he was here. And one of the things that we realize is that negotiation propensity changes across cultures. There are some cultures where if people don't negotiate, then people, they feel guilty, they feel bad, they feel as if they're not doing their due diligence. And there are other cultures, people feel the opposite. They feel bad about negotiating. They don't want to negotiate. They feel uncomfortable and they feel awkward. So there was clearly an individual difference in the propensity to negotiate. Some people like negotiating, and some people think that you should negotiate. And if you don't negotiate, then they feel guilty that I have not done the thing that I'm supposed to do. I'm leaving money on the table. And the others feel just the opposite, that this is embarrassing, this is awkward, I am trying to do something that I shouldn't be doing. And so we started studying why is it that in some communities or some groups or some individuals are more likely to negotiate than others. And so what we did is, again, we looked at real estate data, but this is a different data set. And we started looking at negotiation at county level. County is kind of like district in India, county level negotiations in the US. In real estate. So for each county, we looked at the difference between the list price and the final transaction price for the real estate transactions in that county. And we started seeing whether there's a systematic difference across different counties. And what we found is that in counties that have more conservative political ideology, negotiation tends to be higher. In counties where we see more liberal political ideology, negotiation seems to be less. And we were intrigued by that, and we started exploring it, and we came to a very interesting insight about the human mind. You see, Deepak, how we deal with the world depends a lot on our worldview, the implicit beliefs that we have about how the world operates. So one of the important differences is our perception of how free markets work. So there are some people who believe that free markets provide consumers and customers an opportunity to get the fair price. The free market, these people don't believe that free market guarantees fair price. They believe that free market provides you the opportunity. If you're hardworking, if you are deserving, you can get a fair price. And there are others who believe that free markets guarantee fair price. Because if there is competition that is happening, then the sellers will automatically give you a price that is fair. And this difference actually maps on to political ideology. So people in conservative political ideology tend to believe that free markets don't guarantee fair outcomes. Free market just provide you the opportunity to get fair outcomes. If you don't negotiate, well, that's on you. You didn't get the right price. Whereas people with more liberal political ideology tend to believe that free markets obviously should give fair outcomes, which means that the responsibilities on the sellers to provide the fair price. And when you start buying from the seller, you assume that the price should be fair. So this paper is kind of showing how our worldviews and our ideologies influence price negotiation.
Professor, you have written several papers on the pain of paying. What is this concept and why it is relevant to business managers?
It's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. The term pain of paying was coined by Zellermeyer and George Lowenstein, both at Carnegie Mellon University. The general assumption is that when you're buying any product, you look at the product and assess how valuable that product to you, how much you care about the benefits, or as the economists would say, about the utility from the product. And then you would look at the price. And to the extent the utility that you will gain from the product is higher than the price, you will buy the product. And if the utility is lower, then you will not buy the product. Implicit in this model is the assumption that people are making purchase decisions based on reasoning and thinking, and by comparing the utility with the price of the product. But what George Lowenstein argued, and then he and many of his other colleagues have shown subsequently, is that actually the way people evaluate price can be more emotional. It's not necessarily based on that reasoning and comparison. So they coined this term pain or paying, And they said that there are certain parts of the brain, they implicated the insula, that gets activated when you feel that the price is high. So when people feel that the price is high, then they start feeling a negative experience. And that's the experience that they refer to as pain of pain. And then several scholars in marketing, notably Dilip Soman at University of Toronto, Priya Raghuveer at NYU, they published several papers showing that if you use modes of payment that are more painful, then people will spend less money. And so what I did is I also published a research on this. What I basically looked at is whether that affects the kind of grocery items that shoppers buy. So the logic was quite simple. First one was that people feel more pain when they spend cash than when they spend in credit card. What we actually also realized that people feel less pain even when you spend in debit card. So the notion of pain of paying is very interesting. So if you have something physical, if you have the dollar bills in your wallet, and if you're removing the dollar bills and giving out to someone, that is pain of paying, and you feel bad about it because you know you are losing something that you care about. But if you're swiping a plastic or if you're just showing your mobile device, you don't have the same negative feeling. Even when you're swiping a debit card or your Apple app, you just realize that, well, I'm paying something, but that money is going off from a distant bank somewhere. You don't see the money going out. And psychologically, you don't have the same experience. So what we found is that because of this, people tend to be less deliberative in making grocery shopping. So there are things like, let's say, pies or cakes or carbonated beverages or donuts that you want to impulsively buy. But if you're buying on cash, you would like pause and say, okay, do I have the cash? Should I spend the cash? And that pause make them also assess the justifiability of the purchase. Should I be buying this unhealthy item, high sugar or high calorie item? But when you're just swiping and you're not thinking about cash at all, payment at all, which is the case when you're using an electronic app or a debit card or a credit card, then you're less likely to think about the justifiability of the purchase. What we found is that grocery shopping baskets tends to have more items that are impulsively purchased when people use cashless, painless modes of payment such as credit card, debit card, or a mobile app.
Professor, people have been talking about AI changing market research. Can you please explain various ways in which AI is changing market research?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a very topical one. AI is changing market research in many ways, Deepak. The first one is that AI is going to make the analysis of data very, very fast and very, very easy. So earlier, one of the big bottlenecks in doing market research, be it qualitative or quantitative, is the analysis of data. So if you're doing a focus group, for example, um, you would have to record everything, transcribe everything, and then summarize everything. All of that would take several days, if not weeks. But here, with AI, like I'm sure you're transcribing this recording and you're going to get an AI output, a summary of this recording. So if this were an interview, a consumer interview, you don't need to transcribe. You don't need to summarize. You are getting that readily available. And the same is true even for survey research. AI can help you analyze the data, quantify the data, etc. But the most interesting thing that is happening with AI is the use of synthetic data. So instead of actually talking to consumers, you can now talk to profiles of consumers that are in AI platforms and try to simulate consumer response using synthetic data instead of doing consumer research. So I think it's a very, very exciting time. My prediction is that these, just as computers made data way more available and accessible, just as internet made sharing much more easy, AI is going to democratize analytics. I think more and more people will have analytics available at the tip of their fingers. And more people will use analytical reports and including market research in their everyday decision making.
Professor, what trends do you see in consumer adoption of AI? For example, how do Indian consumers compare to American consumers when it comes to adoption of AI?
So this is an ongoing paper. It's also again with Archer Pan, who is again, as I said, a professor at Wayne State. This was a part of the dissertation research. What we found is that a paradox. We found that when ChatGPT was launched in the end of 2022, and when people started using ChatGPT and started searching for ChatGPT, we saw a much increased interest in that app in Eastern countries like Korea or Singapore or India, or parts of China, um, Middle East, than in Western countries. And that's true for in general for AI. And this is a very paradoxical thing. We find that if you ask people, are you more excited about AI or are you more anxious about AI? People in the West tend to say that I'm more worried about AI. AI kind of makes me anxious. Whereas people in the East say that consumers in the East say that I'm excited about AI. And we wanted to study why that is the case. And what we found is that culture influences the adoption of AI. And in cultures where there is more social comparison, and those cultures tend to be collectivist cultures. In collectivist cultures where people focus on their roles as father, as son, as mother, as teacher, as student, as employee, there tend to be more social comparison. And in those cultures, there is a social pressure to adopt AI and not adopting if your latest vacuum cleaner doesn't have AI in it, or if your latest mobile phone doesn't AI have in it, then it kind of signals to other people that maybe you're not being as forward-looking or modern. That social pressure is less in the Western cultures, and so consumers in the Western culture tend to look at both the pros and the cons. So we find that although almost all of the innovation in AI, or most of it, is happening in the U.S., in companies based in the U.S. In the universities in the US and in various corporations in the US, and almost all of the products are coming out from US companies. When it comes to consumer adoption of AI branded products, consumers in the East are more likely to adopt such products.
Professor, based on all the research that you have done, what advice do you have for corporate executives?
That's a good question. I think my one short advice would be that given by Peter Drucker almost a century ago. The main purpose of a business is to create a customer. So focus on creating value for your customer. Don't get sidetracked in other pursuits along the way. Creating customer value is the most important thing for a business. And it's also the most difficult thing because customer value creation is very, very complex.
Professor Thomas, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question that could be of interest to young people in India who want to study in an Ivy League university such as Cornell. What opportunities exist for students who would like to study at Cornell?
There are lots of opportunities to study in Cornell and other universities like Cornell, but I would like to talk about the global executive MBA program that we have. It's called Executive MBA Americas, and this is ideally suitable for our global population. We have students from various parts of the U.S., from east to the west. We have students from Canada, students from Mexico, and now we have opened this Executive MBA program to the rest of the world also. So what it is basically we have faculty going into a studio, almost like a television studio, and then students are based all over the world. And but we put them in teams, and they attend class in teams, and we give them team activities, team exercises. So we create a simulated learning environment, which is almost like that in a real classroom. So I could point to someone in Mexico City and say, "Hey, John, what do you think of what Sarah just said in Houston?" And then Sarah in Houston can build on someone who just made a comment sitting in Toronto. So this is our model. We've been running this since 2005. Cornell has been the pioneer in this online executive MBA program. We started it 5 years before Zoom was invented. So Zoom, I think, came around in 2010. We started this in 2005 using our own technology. And now we have opened this to people outside of the Americas, students in the global market. So if there are people, audience members, executives in India who want to get a degree without leaving their job. They want to continue working in their companies in India or in Dubai or in Korea or in Singapore or in Brazil, and they have a good job. They have typically 13 to 15 years of experience. They don't want to leave their job. They want to get an Ivy League degree, staying in their current job. This would be a very good option because they can sign up for our online executive MBA program and they can get an Ivy League MBA degree without having to quit their jobs. And moreover, they become a part of the global cohort of executive MBAs, getting to know everybody across different countries.
Professor Thomas, thank you for such a clear, practical conversation. Your work gives managers a rare combination, an evidence-based lens and a usable framework for diagnosis why customers hesitate, where friction hides, and what to fix next. It was a privilege to host you, wishing you a continued success with your research and upcoming work, and we hope to welcome you back again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepak. Good luck with all that you're doing.